is all set for us, so we'll allow some more people to come in and then we'll get going.
Hi, Tina.
Hi, everyone. Nice to see everyone.
Good to see you. And I can confirm that we are able to make that change that we talked about earlier in the week.
Okay, sounds great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Julie, can I ask you to make me a co-host? I think we are going to have a student interpreter coming, but they're not here yet. We do have one deaf participant who's also going to be mentoring our students. So Jackie, if you could give her also co-host so she can pin people, that would be great. Thank you.
Just about a little bit less than 5 more minutes, everyone. All right, we can go ahead and get started, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Paul Grindstaff. I'm interim vice president for advancement at New Mexico Highlands. I will be your host for this afternoon's HU Talk with Tina Cordova. Now, Tina is very active in our foundation alumni board. She's a seventh generation native New Mexican, born and raised in Tularosa, past vice president of our Highlands University Foundation board, and she co-founded the Tularosa Basin Downwinders Consortium. The title of Tina's HU Talk this afternoon is "The Tularosa Basin Downwinders Have Made Important Progress." Tina has both a bachelor's and a master's degree from Highlands in the sciences. And as a fellow alumni of the sciences of Highlands, I hope you all will join me in welcoming Tina, and we look forward to your talk. So with that, Tina, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Paul. It's always a pleasure when I get to spend time with people from Highlands. And for those of you who have listened in before in the past, you know that I have been leading this advocacy organization for 19 years. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the most recent advances that we've seen in the work that we're doing. But I first want to say that a lot of my interest in this subject matter started when I was at Highlands. I did biological research during my graduate work at Highlands through a National Institute of Health grant. And so I do have a background in the sciences and am very proud of everything that I learned at Highlands. And it set me up actually to do this work. And I say many times that I'm a successful business owner and have been in business consistently for 34 years. Own a roofing company that works all over the state of New Mexico. But my life's work is truly the work I do on behalf of the downwinders and uranium workers of New Mexico. So before I jump into the progress that we've made, I want to set up a little bit about the background, because I think for people who are joining us for the first time and learning this information for the first time, they do need to understand the background. So many of you probably are aware that the first atomic bomb was detonated here in New Mexico at the Trinity site. The Trinity site is located in south central New Mexico. And as a matter of fact, we know now that living in a 50-mile radius to the Trinity bomb site, there were 13,000 children, women, and men. If you extend that radius to 150 miles, it encompasses Albuquerque and Santa Fe to the north, and El Paso and Ciudad Juarez to the south, the Arizona border to the west, and almost the Texas border to the east. So it's essentially most of our state. And you're talking about 500,000 people that live here. So there were a great number of people who were affected, and they're referred to as downwinders, the people who live downwind of a nuclear or atomic test site. We also have uranium workers in the state of New Mexico across the Navajo Nation, Laguna, Acoma Pueblo, Hopi, and Zuni lands. We have over 1,000 abandoned uranium mine and mill sites where they extracted 32 million tons of uranium. Imagine that, 32 million tons. The largest, at one time, the largest open pit mine in the world was at a place called Powati, which is part of Laguna Pueblo, and lies about 35 miles the way the crows fly from Albuquerque. And I have visited this site, and as the co-founder of the Tularosa Basin Downwinders Consortium, or TBDC for short, I interact with colleagues that represent the interests of the uranium workers. The bill that we're trying to get passed in Congress would extend compensation to what are called the post-1971 uranium workers, and also extend compensation to the New Mexico downwinders for the first time ever. So let me just briefly tell you that when they detonated the bomb at Trinity, there were things that they knew, they were well-established facts, and then there were things that they didn't know. First of all, they already knew, it was well-established fact, that radiation was detrimental to human health. There was no doubt about that, well-established in 1945. Secondly, they knew that the bomb at Trinity was going to produce fallout. And how did they know that? Because they did a test run of the Trinity bomb that most people don't know about, which also produced radiation as in the form of fallout. And it's called the 100-ton test. It was conducted in May of 1945. They took conventional explosives, 100 tons of TNT. They laced these explosives with radiation, they detonated them, and then they measured the fallout and where it went. So in advance of the big bomb in July, they actually did a mock-up of that and were able to tell that detonating a bomb like this would cause fallout. So they put a bomb with 13 pounds of plutonium at the core on a platform 100 feet off the ground. They detonated it. This is one of the things they didn't know, how much plutonium would be required to cause the fission process. They detonated it. The force of the bomb came down, intercepted the earth, and then it took up an enormous amount of dirt, sand, animal and plant life, incinerated it because it actually produced 10,000 times the heat of the sun. And this fireball just continued to grow and grow and grow and ascend. And they believe that, have estimated that, the fireball rose 40 to 60,000 feet into the atmosphere, past the atmosphere, actually into the stratosphere. Well, what we all know is that when you detonate something like that, it produces fallout, and that fallout has to eventually come back to the earth. And it did in the form of a radioactive ash that fell from the skies for days afterwards. To understand the overexposure to radiation that people experienced as a result of the Trinity bomb, we have to talk about the lifestyles in 1945. In all of these small communities around the Trinity site, communities like Carrizozo, Tularosa, Alamogordo, La Luz, San Antonio, Socorro, Corona, you have to understand that there was not running water. What we did for water back in those days was collect it off the rooftops into cisterns. And July is our rainy season, and back then we had a significant rainy season. And so our cisterns would have been filling up with water. Our rivers, our lakes, our streams, our ditches would have been flowing full of water in July. And when you collect water into a cistern, which is a closed space, and it's radioactive now because you have all that ash that fell from the sky, and you've got a radioactive isotope like plutonium that has a half-life of 24,000 years, or cesium or strontium, that radiation remains in that closed space forevermore. And every time somebody dips water out of the cistern for the purpose of cooking or drinking, it's contaminated, and you're basically ingesting that. We also had no electricity into people's homes, so there was no refrigeration. We had no way to refrigerate food. Some people had ice boxes, and we had a booming ice business in Tularosa. But what we didn't have was a refrigerator where you could store produce or dairy or meat. So what did that mean? That meant that everybody produced their own food at their own homes, and what you bought at a mercantile store were things like sugar, flour, coffee, rice, cereal, but not dairy, not meat, not produce. People had gardens, and they had orchards, and they raised cows and pigs and sheep and goats and chickens, and they hunted. A lot of hunting. A lot of hunting still goes on today. And now their entire food source was contaminated. There are three mechanisms for being exposed to radiation. The first is inhalation, and as the ash fell from the sky, people would have been inhaling particulate matter. You only have to inhale one particle of any of those radioactive isotopes, and it remains in your body, giving off radiation, damaging cells, damaging tissue, damaging organs that eventually turns into cancers. So there was the inhalation, there was the ingestion, because we were drinking radioactive water and eating foods that were now all contaminated by radiation. And then the last way that you are exposed to radiation is absorption through your skin. So you can well imagine that if you don't have running water, you don't bathe as often. And as that ash fell from the sky and it got on your scalp or your skin, it likely stayed there for days, maybe for even a week, until the time that you were able to bathe and wash it away. So people were maximally exposed. The real tragedy associated with this is that the first victims of an atomic bomb were American children, because in the summer directly after Trinity, we had a huge uptick in infant mortality. We went from losing something like 30 babies per thousand to losing over 100 babies per thousand. And we have collected the data on this, and this has been well documented in the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists. We have actually compared state death certificate records to Catholic Church records. And what we have found is that there were a lot of babies that died that summer, and we don't have death certificates. And why is that? Well, because we didn't have hospitals. Babies were born at home. We didn't have medical facilities. Babies were born at home, and their births were registered at some point in their life, but not right after they were born. So if you had a baby that summer and the baby was sick and didn't survive, their birth was not recorded and their death was not recorded. So that number, 100 babies per thousand, is likely very understated. And we're collecting that data. This again is something that our government has never atoned for. They never warned us before or afterwards. And women, just like all mammals, would have been concentrating the radiation in their mammary glands, breastfeeding their babies, and essentially poisoning them, to say nothing about the radiation load that the babies received anyway. So what has happened? Well, in my own family, we have 5 generations of cancer now. I had 2 great-grandfathers alive at the time in Tularosa, 45 miles the way the crows fly from the Trinity bomb site. They both died within that first 10 years of what was told to us to be stomach cancer. We'll never know because there wasn't diagnostic mechanisms for really knowing or understanding. But what we do know is that no one had ever heard the word cancer before in our communities. And at about 10 years, people started to manifest disease. Both my grandmothers had cancer. My dad died from basically tongue cancer without risk factors. My dad didn't drink, didn't smoke, would never use chewing tobacco, and had no viruses. And he developed 2 primary cancers of the tongue spaced 8 years apart. He also had prostate cancer in between. And when I asked the oncologist, how does a man who doesn't have any risk factors actually develop 2 tongue cancers? And they said, it really doesn't happen, but we see it all the time in New Mexico. I was diagnosed with thyroid cancer at the age of 39, and the first thing they asked me was, when were you exposed to radiation? And my answer was, I've never really been exposed to radiation, but I was raised in a community 45 miles from the Trinity test site. And if I had to guess, I would say that that's my risk factor. Now, I have a 24-year-old niece that when she was 23 was diagnosed with thyroid cancer. She's had a lot of complications, and we have no idea what her future looks like. But we are now seeing a 5th generation of people being affected by this in communities all across New Mexico. We've documented hundreds of these families. We see children now getting sick. And the truth is, when you're exposed to radiation, when you're actually the person that's exposed, there's a latency period between the time you're exposed and the time you develop cancer, as was the case with my dad, my grandmothers, my great-grandfathers. But if you have the genetics for it, you could manifest cancer at any point in your life. I just received a health survey from an extended member of my family documenting his 5-year-old granddaughter who developed eye cancer at the age of 2. They've had to remove one of her eyes and another eye is at risk. And so in our communities, we're now seeing children being more affected. And what I can tell you is that everybody understands the physiological effects. It's obvious. It's a disease process. It's getting sick. It's cancer, autoimmune diseases. But what we don't see as often or understand or discuss are the psychological, emotional, and financial effects. So let me talk to you very briefly about that. New Mexico is the state most dependent on Medicaid of any state in the country. A full 47 to 50% of all the people in New Mexico access health care using Medicaid. And then, above and beyond that, we just recently found out through information that was shared by Representative Stansbury that New Mexico is one of the states carrying some of the highest medical debt in the country. We have about 2 million people living here. We're carrying $881 million, almost $1 billion in medical debt. That's not sustainable. These are not sustainable equations, folks. So I often tell people, if you live in New Mexico, if you live any place in New Mexico, you're downwind of something. New Mexico was irradiated when they detonated the Trinity bomb. We have open pit uranium mines that are still leaching radiation. And just 3 weeks ago, a professor emeritus from Northern Arizona University, Dr. Michael Ketterer, released findings. He spent the summer in Los Alamos, the summer of 2023 in Los Alamos. He took soil, water, and plant samples, tested them for plutonium, and what did he find? He found the highest levels of plutonium that he's measured any place in the world, and that includes places like Chernobyl and Rocky Flats. And so I always say, if you live in New Mexico, you're downwind of some process that has taken place here that has released radiation into our environment. But if you don't identify as a downwinder the way that I do, let me just say, you have experienced the results of this simply because people never have an opportunity to develop generational wealth and contribute to a child's college education or helping them buy a home. And what happens is, instead of people having something to pass along, the only thing they pass along is medical debt. And this too is not sustainable. For 14 years, we've had bills introduced in Congress to basically extend what's called the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act to the people of New Mexico for the first time ever. The fund was set up in 1990, so it's been around for 34 years. And we were the first people exposed to radiation by an atomic bomb anyplace. And the fund has never included the people of New Mexico. So there are also what are called post-1971 uranium workers. They're not included either. It's not that it became safe to work in that industry after 1971. It's simply that the United States government was no longer the only consumer of uranium. So they said, we're not going to take responsibility for people's health any longer. We're actually going to allow industry to take care of that. And what industry did all across the Navajo Nation, Laguna and Acoma Pueblo, is they simply closed up shop and left all these Superfund sites where people still raise their children adjacent to them. And they left a lot of sick uranium workers behind who've never been attended to. I go to these places like Laguna Pueblo, the Navajo Nation. I work with the people there. And what do I find when I go into those communities? I find a lot of women who are widows raising children and grandchildren because the husbands have all died. The shame of it is that the government utilized people's poverty against them. They promised them a better wage than what they were earning other places if they would come into the mines and work there. But they didn't provide them with adequate safety training or safety gear. And so now these people are suffering from pulmonary fibrosis, renal failure. They're suffering from all sorts of cancers, lung cancer, kidney cancer, etc. The bill we're pushing for would add what are called the post-1971 uranium workers. The bill would also add the downwinders in places like Idaho and Montana, Colorado, Guam, and it would cover all of Utah, Arizona, and Nevada, not just the few counties that are included today. So how has this been working for us? Well, in 14 years, we had never had a vote until 2023. The US Senate brought this to the floor. They wanted to add the bill that would provide compensation, health care coverage for downwinders and uranium workers to the National Defense Authorization Act. But, and the bill passed in the US Senate by a vote of 60 to 38. And then it was moved over for reconciliation in the House, and Speaker Johnson refused to allow it to move forward as part of the NDAA, and it was stripped out. So we had to start over in 2024. And in 2024, Senator Josh Hawley, who has organized the Republicans in the Senate to support this, decided to add some zip codes in places where the nuclear industrial complex was enriching uranium and dumping the waste locally. Places like Missouri, which he represents, places in Kentucky and Tennessee, and off the coast of Alaska, where they detonated a nuclear device. And in doing so, he actually gathered up more support for the bill. So now the vote was 69 to 30. The US Senate passed the bill by a vote of 69 to 30, more than a supermajority. This never happens in the US Senate. I think anyone who follows politics these days understands that. On that same day in March, President Biden, who I had had a chance to speak at when he was in New Mexico last fall, issued a statement of support. And in that statement of support, he said, pass the bill, get it to my desk, I will sign it, and we will make sure it's properly funded. But as of today's date, we still have not seen any movement out of Speaker Johnson. He continues to block the bill, even though we've been told, and it's been said in public places many times in DC and in New Mexico, that we have the votes in the House of Representatives. There's enough bipartisan support in the House of Representatives to pass this. One of the things that I point out all the time is that this is not a partisan issue. Exposure to radiation has affected the young, the old, the male, the female, the black, the white, the Republican and the Democrat alike. And if you look at the bill that we're trying to pass currently, it would positively affect 57 Republican House districts across the country and 41 Democrat. So it's obviously a bill that should receive bipartisan support also from Speaker Johnson and in the House of Representatives. We will not give up. Last week, I had an opportunity along with one of my colleagues from Laguna Pueblo and one of my colleagues from the TVDC Steering Committee, had a 20-minute conversation with Leader Jeffries. And one of the things that Leader Jeffries said to us was that he thought that he understood this issue, but had no idea the effects, the way that we described them to him. When we told him our horrible family histories, he was obviously affected by what he heard. He also told us that he was amazed at the evidentiary material we have accumulated throughout the 19 years of doing this work and presented to him. One of the things they tell us is that it's going to cost too much. And when I spoke to Leader Jeffries about that, I told him, let me remind you, we have spent $10 trillion on our nuclear program since their inceptions, $10 trillion. And we've only spent $2.5 billion paying restitution to uranium miners and downwinders in the 34 years that these bills have been in place, 2.5 billion. I told him, if you look at the pie chart that we've constructed, the pie chart tells it all. We had to actually exaggerate the 2.5 billion to make it basically show up as something other than just a red line in the pie chart. And so we know that the idea that it's going to cost too much is blatantly untrue and actually obscene. I say all the time these days that we live in a democracy and the basis for that is law and order. And I couldn't go out there and recklessly, willfully harm other people. And then when I'm held to account for it, simply say, oh, it's going to cost too much and I'm not going to put my resources towards that. I couldn't do that and none of you could do that. And so we will continue to press Congress. The wonderful thing about the meeting with Leader Jeffries is that he promised to do everything he can to keep this at the top of his list of things to negotiate with Speaker Johnson before the end of the year. But he clearly said, someday I will be Speaker of the House. That's just how things work. And I promise that when I'm Speaker of the House, we will pass it. And he also said that he will stand with us in support of us until the time that we get this done. It was truly wonderful to, after all these years, meet with somebody that has the kind of power and authority that he has. The recognition that we have received over the last, I would say, 5 years is so significant. I mean, the movement that we have now is encompassing of many people all across the United States and the world. Today, this morning, prior to this talk at Highlands, I spoke at UNM. I spoke last week at Illinois State University. I speak at UNM again next week, and I speak to university students from all across the country on a very regular basis. And what I share with you today is being shared all across the country. We have this amazing documentary out right now called First We Bombed New Mexico. You can go to the website for First We Bombed New Mexico and you can see the trailer. We're certainly hoping that at some point in the near future, Highlands will be able to find a sponsor to bring a screening of the film there. It's winning awards at film festivals from one coast to the other. It just won the Best of Festival award at the Gig Harbor Film Festival in the state of Washington. It has won similar awards in Austin, Texas, Santa Barbara, California, Palm Springs, California. It's just doing wonderful. We're very proud of the film. We do absolutely need to still raise money to keep the film out there. The unfortunate thing is that streamers are not paying much attention these days to social justice films. They're more interested in films about celebrities. We're looking for a celebrity, if anyone knows one. It would be great if a significant celebrity attached themselves to the film. That would bring a lot of attention to the film. And so we just continue on this path of fighting for justice, which will not only apply to the people who lived in those towns most closely situated to the bomb site, but all across New Mexico. One thing to remember is that Las Vegas was underneath the cloud, the significant cloud that traveled away from Trinity in a northeasterly direction, while the entire state received fallout. And we know that now because 2 years ago, a Princeton scientist recreated the blast using today's technology, and he recreated the fallout. And we know exactly where the fallout went now. And while for many years they said that only a swath of New Mexico received fallout, we know that that is indeed not true, that the entire state received fallout, but that major part of the fallout traveled right over the top of Las Vegas. I would invite everybody to join with us. You can also go to our website, which is www.trinitydownwinders, and it's plural, trinitydownwinders.com. You can just Google search Trinity Downwinders and you're going to find us. Everything you'll ever want to know is at our website. We've got a couple things coming up over the next few weeks. Number one, they open the Trinity test site to visitors, and on October 19th, we will stage a peaceful protest there. We just want the thousands of people who go in there. It's truly, a destination point for a lot of tourists. And we just want those thousands of tourists that will enter that day to understand that we lived here, we inhabited this area, and as much as they want to say no one was harmed, we're here to basically testify to the fact that yes, we were harmed, and yes, we did live here, and we lived as close as 12 miles away. And then later this month, on October 26th, we have a fundraiser in Albuquerque. If anybody's interested, it's going to be a Dia de los Muertos celebration. We regularly in July, and have done this for I think about 15 years now, we have a memorial service, a candlelight vigil on the Saturday most closely positioned to the July 16th anniversary. This coming year will be 80 years. We'll have a very big celebration. But this October, we're going to have a Dia de los Muertos event, and it's going to be a celebration. It will not be the same sort of memorial service. We will be celebrating the lives of the people that we've lost. And so I think that I've pretty much said everything I was hoping to say, and I'm hoping that there are some questions, that there are people in the audience that will either want to share their lived experience, because people from all over the state have a similar lived experience to me, or they'll want to ask some questions or give some comments, or may have commentary. And I'd love to be able to offer a safe space right now for people to do that if they're interested. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Tina. That was incredible. And again, as with most of the HU talks, our audience not only stayed the same and retained viewers, but it grew in viewership as the talk went on. So well done. Thank you very much for that, all of that important information. We'd like to open it up for questions. You can enter something in the chat box, or you can unmute yourself and ask a question if you have one for Tina. Well, I'm going to take the opportunity to ask a question. So, Tina, I was fascinated by the study by the folks at Princeton. So, could you talk a little bit more? We talked about Las Vegas, and of course, a lot of us on here are native New Mexicans. Ironically, my hometown is Los Alamos. And before that, I lived in Farmington, so I'd be curious to hear the extent of the cloud, where it went north, south, east, and west, if you have that information.
Yeah, I would be glad to share that with you, Paul. I was actually involved in that study. I was a consultant to the study. So we had always wanted someone to use today's technology and recreate the blast, because the oral histories that we were hearing did not coincide with what the government was saying, which was that the fallout only went off in this northeasterly direction and that most of our state was spared. That did not coincide with the oral histories. And so this Princeton scientist used a $40,000 computer, and then he used weather data that had been collected for a very long time about weather patterns for that time of year. And then, knowing all the specifics about the blast itself, he was able to recreate the blast and the fallout. And what we know is that the fallout sort of lingered over the top of New Mexico for a number of days. And it lingered there. A lot of it just started to disperse with the wind patterns associated with, our monsoon season. And then the major part of the plume went off in a northeasterly direction, all the way to the Atlantic Ocean. On the way to the Atlantic Ocean, they know that there were episodes of what are called rainout, where there was a significant rainfall associated with the cloud as it passed over certain places, and that in those places there was a disbursement of more radiation. What he also knows from the study that he did is that it in total irradiated 46 states, which included New Mexico, Canada, and Mexico. And so it was a major fallout producing event, far greater than our government had ever admitted to. This is a peer-reviewed study. There will eventually be more information in a scientific journal about it. He released the findings through a New York Times article, and he did the same thing for all 100 of the nuclear blasts or tests that took place at the Nevada test site. What I didn't mention, Paul, is that during the time of the Nevada testing, we had monitors, physical monitoring stations throughout the American West. Those monitoring stations did tell the government where the fallout was going after these tests. We know that New Mexico received fallout through the summer of 1962 from the testing that took place in Nevada. So your exposure to radiation is cumulative. And what that meant is the people in New Mexico got a high dose from Trinity and then got regular dosing through the summer of 1962 from Nevada. That's how we have determined that places like Idaho and Montana should be included in the compensation fund, and places like Colorado, all of Arizona, all of Utah, all of Nevada, is because of the monitoring station data. And he also has recreated those blasts, and when they finally do release his findings in a publication, a scientific journal, it will include the fallout mapping for all 100 above ground tests.
Very interesting information. Thank
you. Did that answer your question?
Absolutely. Looks like Jackie has a question, maybe?
Okay, so I am very interested. Yeah, thank you so much for your presentation and for sharing. It's really made me think. I, was actually born in, in Espanola. But my mom, who was born in 1948, she worked in Los Alamos at the labs. And she worked there for over 30 years. Okay, so you know what? I would like to ask my question using my own voice, and if this will work, let me do that.
Okay, I hope I'm clear. Okay, so my grandma was pregnant in 1947 full term, but she lost her baby at full term. My mom was born in 1948. lived in Espanola, for many years. And then she started working at the National Laboratory in Los Alamos, where they do the bomb making, where they make the bombs. And she worked there for M3 for many years. As a child, I was able to go over there every 5 years to see these bombs being exploded when they have these family days. But anyways, when my concern, or what I'm wondering is that a lot of these people that got sick had gotten cancer, right? Well, my mom had gotten ALS when she was 48, and just out of the blue, we had no idea where she had gotten this from or whatever. In 2 years, she was dead, and I always wonder if anything has to do with, what you were talking about, or if she was being exposed to any of this. I did question 15 years ago. I talked to the people at the lab, and they were like, no, it's more related to the people that had gotten cancer, but not ALS. What's your thought on this? Is this only just for cancer? The people only gotten sick with cancer?
Well, interestingly enough, Jackie, I was just talking to my brother last night about the number of people that I know in Tularosa that have had ALS. Tularosa is a very small town, and we've had a number of people develop ALS. We've also had a number of people develop a lot of very rare and unusual autoimmune diseases. We know that the radiation damages cells. Anytime that you're exposed to radiation, your organs become subject to that radiation. And some of these diseases result because of damage. And so I often say cancer is just one of a multitude of things that could be caused by radiation exposure. Certainly, these really rare autoimmune diseases and rare neurological diseases could be the result of radiation. They have not done enough research on this subject matter. My uncle, my dad's oldest brother, died from Lewy body dementia, which is fairly rare. But again, we have all these men in Tularosa that have had Lewy body dementia. So to me, it's not anecdotal. No one has done the research to tie it all together, but they only compensate for cancers. And there is a fund, actually. It's called the EEOI-CPA. That's the Energy Employees Compensation Fund. And I have no idea if they compensate, because I've never, researched that program much. I have no idea if they compensate for anything other than cancers, but they might. Your family obviously lived downwind of the labs. And like I said earlier, they have now found all these very high levels of plutonium in Acid Canyon, an area that they said was fully remediated, that they had turned back over to the county of Los Alamos, where people recreate, where they hike and bike and take their kids, and it's part of the Rio Grande watershed. So what we are being exposed to, what we have been exposed to, is unknown to all of us. And certainly there are a number of disease processes that I believe are associated with radiation exposure, just from what I see in communities, but not necessarily proven because the research isn't there.
Yeah, and also her sister, my auntie, got dementia at 68, and she's 70 now, and downhill, and my grandmother had stomach cancer. But it just, I was just wondering about all. It just makes me wonder. But thank you.
You're welcome, Jackie, and I'm sorry for all the loss that you've experienced.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Jackie and Tina. Any other questions from the gathering? Well, I certainly do appreciate everybody's attention.
Keep your fingers crossed. If we can get this bill passed, it's not an open checkbook. People will still have to go through an application process, and people will be able to apply on behalf of a deceased loved one, like a wife can apply on behalf of a husband or vice versa. And children can apply on behalf of deceased parents and grandparents. But it's not an open checkbook, and we'll have a lot of work ahead of us once we get the bill passed. And we will do outreach into communities all across New Mexico. Certainly, if anybody who's participated today wants to know how to reach me, my email address is fairly simple. It's my first name, T Cordova, so T Cordova at Queston, and that's spelled QUESTON.net. I'll put it in the chat, tcordova@queston.net. And again, you'll be able to find me if you go to our website. All the information about who we are and what our work is there. And if you are at all interested, please go check out the documentary. We're very proud of that work, and hopefully soon, very soon, there'll be a screening of the film in Las Vegas.
We certainly look forward to that. And thank you again, Tina. Thanks to all of our guests. We were up around 30 viewers for most of the time. And everyone held on for the entire talk. It was very informative and fascinating. So thank you again, Tina. And again, that's tcordova@queston.net. And Gina in the chat box extends her thanks to you as well, Tina.
Thank you all. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Hi, everyone who's still on. I just want to let you know to hang on. We've got another fantastic HU talk coming right up at 3 o'clock. And this will be given by Dr. Roxanne Gonzalez and Miss Alexis Duran. And the title is Brats, a Different Kind of Veteran. So hang on for about a few more minutes.